I'm what you might call a Junitarian. That is to say that my father's heritage is Jewish, and my parents set out to raise us four kids as Jews. But apparently, at some point, they decided that the local rabbi was boring, and they met some interesting people who turned out to be Unitarian Universalists. And my parents have been pretty much holding up the corners of their Unitarian Universalist church in Walnut Creek ever since. I was raised in UU Sunday School, but the best holidays, the ones that really felt like significant religious holidays, were the Jewish ones that we celebrated. And my favorite has always been Passover. Passover has everything that you need for a truly great holiday. It doesn't have the gift-giving stuff of Christmas, but it has wonderful food. Let me just say, if you've ever eaten gefilte fish or a matzo ball out of a jar, you should never do that. You have to have the homemade stuff. Trust me, great food. It has singing, it has liturgy, it has prayers, real prayers said in Hebrew. It has a story, and it has something that UU practices generally lack, which is a sense of obligation. There are things that you need to do as part of the Passover Seder in order to have done them right. There's a sense of significance that says, this is how we do it. These are the things that you need to do. And best of all, the things that you need to do are not particularly onerous. You have to drink 4 glasses of wine, grape juice if you're a kid or someone who otherwise doesn't drink alcohol. You need to say some prayers. You need to tell the story. And you need to tell it in first person. This is what happened to us when we were slaves in Egypt. And you need to explain the items on the Seder plate. Because Passover is a real religious holiday, it has real symbols. And it asks you to actually tell people about those symbols so that they know, so that the children can repeat afterwards. These are the symbols that we have. These are the symbols that we eat. And this is what they mean. And so I'd like to take you on a bit of a Junitarian tour through the symbols that are put on the Seder plate, a special plate that you have for the celebration of Passover with little marked, in Hebrew if you have the one from Israel that my grandma got, marked spots for where the symbols go. On the Seder plate, you find choroset. Choroset is a delicious concoction made of chopped up apples and walnuts and usually wine and honey, at least if you're from Eastern European Jewish descent as I am. And the choroset is supposed to symbolize the bricks and the mortar that the Jews were forced to use as slaves in Egypt. Choroset, although it tastes delicious, is about work. It's about the labor of your hands. It's a symbol of oppression, but in some strange way it's also a symbol of freedom. Because even in the midst of oppression, in the midst of slavery, there is what you do. There is who you are. There is the way that you carry on in the face of adversity. And although we don't generally think of that as freedom, that ability to carry on, to do your work, to do what you have to do, is in fact its own piece of the celebration of this holiday of freedom. But along with the choroset, during the Seder, you eat maror, which is bitter herb. If you do it the way my family does it, you go and you get horseradish from the Chinese market, the most powerful horseradish you have ever tasted, and you grind it fresh to make just blisteringly, blazingly hot horseradish, the bitterest of bitter herbs. It's a symbol of suffering, the suffering of the Jews under slavery. But even the bitterness of the bitter herbs is a part of the story of freedom, because it's only when you realize the bitterness of slavery, when you stop accepting your enslaved condition, when you realize that something about this is wrong, it's only then that you start thinking and plotting and trying to find your way toward a new land. The third item on the Seder plate is a hard-boiled egg. Now, an egg is a symbol of fertility, but there's also something very special about an egg. Most foods, when you cook them, they get softer, more tender. But an egg, the longer you cook it, the harder it gets. An egg is a symbol of freedom because an egg is a symbol of resistance. It says, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It says that whatever you do to us, we can become stronger. We can become tougher. We can become more able to resist. And in that we find our freedom. And on the Seder plate, you put a shank bone, a roasted lamb bone that is a symbol of the sacrifice made in the temple. The sacrifice that the Jews made when they marked the doorways in blood so that their households might be passed over in the smiting of the firstborn. And even in sacrifice, there is freedom. In freedom, there is always sacrifice, because freedom means change, and change means letting go, and there is no letting go without sacrifice, without giving something up. And so, when we choose our freedom, we choose change, and we offer up that which we cannot keep. And finally, on the Seder plate, there's karpas, a green vegetable. And my family always parsley, green as you can get, tasting of spring. Because as old as the Hebrew religion is, and as old as the celebration of Passover is, the holiday is actually older than that. It's a celebration of springtime itself. It harks back before the Jews to the most ancient of times, when people celebrated the most ancient of freedoms. The knowledge that spring comes, that things grow, that whatever the conditions are at this present moment, whether it's snow or muck or drought, it's going to change. Things are going to grow, and we are going to partake of that greenness. And someday, perhaps, we will enjoy that taste of spring, that taste of freedom in the promised land.